Hello to everybody tuning in on our news broadcast today. I'm Ron Burgundy, and I'll be taking you through our journey through the news. My co-worker Michaela is gone today, but Luke is here just to fill in. We're going to be taking you back through the great days of the Cold War today with our special news broadcast. First, I'm going to talk about the Cold War. It was a symbolic boundary between East and West Germany, and that separated democracy on the west side and communism on the east side. And on August 12th through the 13th, just after midnight, they put up the Berlin Wall in the middle of the night, and no one knew it was coming up. And after they put that up, whatever side you were on, you basically had to stay there. So if you went to sleep on another end than your family members were, then you were stuck over there for decades. And then finally, the Berlin Wall was brought down after the people of the government finally decided to let the people cross, and slowly people chipped the Berlin Wall down. And then Germany was made a complete nation on October 3rd, 1990. And then secondly, we have the U-2 spy plane. The U.S. had been spying on the Soviet Union for about 4 years. And the Soviet Union knew that they were spying on them, but they couldn't do anything because they didn't have enough power, or they didn't have the right missiles to take down the planes. And then finally they created the Zenith ground-to-air missile that could lock on to the planes, and then they shot down a plane. And then the pilot was captured, and the U.S. is very, they were very sad about it, I guess. And then, so the U.S. found another spy, and they traded, and that was the first spy swap. The USSR was the first people in space. They sent a satellite Sputnik into space, and it is the first ever into space. In 1958, the U.S. launched its own satellite, Explorer 1. It was designed by the U.S. Army under the direction of rocket scientist Wernher von Braun. The Russians also sent Lunar 2, which was the first space probe to hit the moon. The arms race is what happened when the U.S. decided to compete with Russia to create the most nuclear bombs. In 1949, the Russians succeeded in creating the atomic bomb, and the U.S. no longer monopolized the atomic bomb industry. The Russians detonated the Tsar Bomba, the king of the bombs. It had the equivalent of 50,000 tons of TNT, more than all the bombs in World War II. This act was viewed as intimidation from the Soviets. And then lastly, the invasion of Afghanistan. This invasion happened in December 1979. They went in to help the Afghan government that wanted communism to get rid of the non-communistic fighters. They sent in about 30,000 troops, and by the end of the war, it turned into a massive stalemate with more than 100,000 Soviet troops controlling towns and cities. The Soviets tried to eliminate all of the Mujahideen's civilian support by depopulating and bombing rural areas. In the end, Mujahideen couldn't stop the Soviets in the air power, which dominantly won them the war. Now thrown into Cody. History.
Thanks, Ron. Today we'll see what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about the Vietnam War. We will start off with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, then we will lead into the discussion between Ho Chi Minh and Lyndon B. Johnson to the Tet Offensive, to the U.S. reactions of the war, and then we will end with Viet Cong. Military planned multiple major attacks on the north of Vietnam, but President Johnson feared that the rest of the U.S. would not support the aggressiveness and expansion of the world. Later on, during the summer of that year, rebel forces had gained control over a good portion of South Vietnam, and Senator Goldwater started to denounce President Johnson for not going forth with the war more aggressively. On August 2nd, the U.S. destroyer Maddox was fired by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. A couple days after the Maddox was fired, the Maddox and another destroyer said that they were under attack, which was a lie. Then the war started getting more aggressive. Ho Chi Minh sent a letter to President Lyndon B. Johnson working out negotiations to end the war. In this letter, Ho Chi Minh had stated that the U.S. was so far from Vietnam that the U.S. should not have intervened. It has intensified the war in Vietnam, turning South Vietnam into a neo-colony and a military base of the United States. U.S. government has committed war crimes, crimes against peace, and against mankind. He goes on and says the only reason the war is big is because the U.S. intervened, that the U.S. needs to back out of Vietnam and let the Vietnamese people take care of their own affairs. Vietnamization is the U.S. policy of withdrawing its troops and transferring the responsibility and direction of the war effort to the government of South Vietnam. On January 31st, 1968, some 70,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched the Tet Offensive, a coordinated series of fierce attacks on more than 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam. Though U.S. and South Vietnamese forces managed to hold off the communist attack, news coverage of the offensive shocked and dismayed the American public and further eroded support for the new war effort. Despite heavy casualties, North Vietnam achieved a strategic victory with the Tet Offensive. As the attacks marked a turning point in the Vietnam War and the beginning of the slow, painfully America withdrawal from the region. A nationwide debate ensued over participation in the war. Americans grew increasingly dissatisfied with their nation's war policy. Some described as hawks argued that the United States should use maximum military force to gain a quick victory. Others, called doves, argued that the conflict in Vietnam was essentially a civil war in which the United States had no right to interfere. Some of the doves demanded immediate American withdrawal, while others called for gradually disengagement from the war. Vietnamese communists, though beginning in the mid-1950s as a collection of various groups opposed to the government of President Diem, the Viet Cong became in 1960 the military arm of the National Liberation Front, NLF. In 1969, the NLF joined other groups in the areas of South Vietnam that were controlled by the Viet Cong to form the Provisional Revolutionary Government, PRG. The movement's principal objectives were the overthrow of the South Vietnamese government and the reunification of Vietnam. After the short break, we will be going back to Ron in the showroom.
Welcome to Taco Bell. What would you like today?
I like a Baja Blast.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Taco Bell. What would you like today?
A Baja Blast.
Oh, what is it? It's hot. Why is it so good?
Because it's good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What's so special about it? Wow, Baja Blast. It's awesome. And after that great commercial, we're going to roll with Brianna in the newsroom. Or not yet. No, so. Oh, we're having some technical difficulties right now. A Baja Blast is really good. Some good stuff. You should go out and buy it. Support your local. And now to Brianna in the newsroom.
Okay, hello. I'm Brianna here in Moscow, Russia. On this day many years ago, the USSR was turned to Russia when the Soviet Union had collapsed. Communism in Russia had also collapsed. Today, Russia is still a federation government. A federation government has states like the U.S. and citizens can vote on some things. We will go all the way back to Russian revolutions to the early 1990s. The Russian Revolution was a civil war inside of Russia. Reds versus whites, Bolsheviks versus non-Bolsheviks, or communism versus anti-communism. The whites /anti-communism /anti-Bolsheviks fought hard but were defeated by the Red Army. It was a fatal loss for the White Army, so communism continued in the USSR. Joseph Stalin's rise to power, which is that man right there, contributed to the amount of time the USSR was communist. Stalin became a dictator to Russia. Stalin was well liked by the Bolsheviks and the former dictator Vladimir Lenin. From 1934 to 1940, Stalin had started a political campaign called the Purge. The Purge had been used to cleanse Russia of the undesirables. Gulags were imprisonment camps, labor camps, and concentration camps in the Soviet Union that the Purge people were serving. Years later, Stalin had died. After Stalin had died, Khrushchev had been put in charge. Only 3 years after Stalin's death, Khrushchev denounced Stalin, saying that he run the USSR into the ground. Many people looked to Stalin as a savior. Khrushchev said that it was a lie. Stalin had endangered and ignored the warnings of Hitler's future actions. Then, 35 years later, the USSR had collapsed in failure to control the country with the type of government. This collapse was a partial end of communism in the USSR. We will keep you updated as new things occur in this part of the world. Back to Ron with Channel 4 News.
Thank you for joining us on this great news broadcast. We hope you had a nice day. Stay classy, North Dakota.